I'll start with some quick introductions and then pass it over to Dr. Chandler. My name is Lauren Bell, and I am the Vice President for the Learning Disability Association of Georgia. We are really, really grateful and lucky to have Dr. Chandler with us tonight. Um, he is going to be sharing some of his expertise from the field of dyslexia, and I will let him do more in-depth introductions, but he is with the Georgia State Dyslexia Program. So he has a lot of knowledge to share. Um, I'm also dropping in the chat while everybody is joining um, a link to our LDA's Fall Family Expo, which is this weekend. It's in Dunwoody. It's a great opportunity to connect with community and receive resources and support for learning disabilities. So we'd really love to see you there if you're around and available. But I'm going to go ahead and let Dr. Chandler get started. Thank you guys so much for being with us tonight. And thank you, Dr. Chandler. We're excited to learn from you.
Thank you so much for having me. Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited to be here tonight. And thank you, LDA Georgia, again for inviting me. Tonight, my talk is called Demystifying Dyslexia, a parent's guide to understanding and support. I'm gonna walk you through what dyslexia is, what reading is, some evidence-based supports for your child, adolescent child, early elementary child, and even some adult-based supports as well. And then we'll have time at the end for a Q&A. So I'll be fielding questions at the end. So if you have any throughout this entire webinar, feel free to either say them to the end, drop them in the chat, and I will address them at the end. Again, welcome. A little bit about me. I'm Brennan. I'm an assistant professor of dyslexia at Georgia State University. I also coordinate our dyslexia endorsement program where I train dyslexia interventionists at the graduate level. I'm a literacy researcher, so I actually conduct intervention research. I'm a teacher educator. I train in-service teachers, also a literacy consultant as well to schools, states, districts, and families. I received my PhD in the area of learning disabilities, in the area of reading intervention from the University of Texas at Austin. And we're almost at that decade, that 10-year mark, as experience as a special educator, dyslexia interventionist, and now university professor. Really, I see my role as a professor, as an intervention researcher, to really bridge the gap between what we know from research and what we do in practice. So practice at home, practice in schools, and practice in our communities so that every child can access the instruction and support they deserve. And so as a researcher, I ask a lot, what helps students with dyslexia make meaningful progress? Which parts of these programs are backed by evidence? And how can we tailor our intervention to individual student needs? So they're the questions I ask a lot. I'll put up my contact information at the end, but please let's keep in touch. I have my website right here. I do parent webinars, teacher workshops as well. You can find them on there. Also have a LinkedIn if that's easy to connect. I usually post stuff on there. We're starting the Instagram, so I don't have anything posted there, but if you want to be an early adopter of that, go ahead and give a follow. Really working to disseminate some of this research so that families and schools and districts have access to some of this. This is also my email as well, but I'll give it again at the end of the talk. So here's the game plan for tonight. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what reading is. When I say reading, what does that mean? I'm going to dig into really what is dyslexia, and I'm going to unpack some common dyslexia learning profiles. Spoiler alert, it looks not the same in everybody. There's a lot of what we call heterogeneity when we think about dyslexia in kids that have it. We're going to talk about supports for dyslexia, sort of matching those profiles of dyslexia I'm going to talk about, and then have some time for a Q&A. But first, to all get on the same page, what is reading? And so we need to know that learning to read it's not a natural act. Oral language, our spoken language is, but learning to read is not natural. It's a really actually cognitively demanding skill, and it's a skill that needs to be taught. And for kids with dyslexia, taught a lot and very explicitly and at high levels. And so to unpack what I mean by reading, there's this equation we use in reading research, and I share with parents a lot, and it's called the simple view of reading. And really, it helps us understand that reading isn't just one skill. So, to really read, the goal of reading is reading comprehension. So, being able to read written text or written language and understand it. But to actually read with reading comprehension, it's a product, it's not a skill. We actually can't teach kids directly how to be skilled reading comprehenders. It's a process. So, kids need the ability to both recognize words. So, automatically be able to read words with ease, get those words off the page, and the ability to understand oral or spoken language. And so this is really what gets us at that product of reading comprehension. So it's really important to also sort of understand this formula. It's multiplicative. We use a multiplication symbol here. It's not addition, meaning that if either side of these is close to zero, so word recognition or language comprehension, comprehension will also drop to zero, right? One times zero is zero. And so for a child who really has great oral language skills, with some kids with dyslexia often have, but can't read the words, they're not going to be able to comprehend text. And so a good reader is going to be able to rapidly read and recognize words on the page. And they're also going to have really good oral language comprehension. So I'm thinking about like understanding story, understanding audiobooks, and that will get them at good reading or skilled reading comprehension. But for students with dyslexia, they often have pretty adequate language comprehension skills, pretty robust vocabularies. If you're talking to a child or an individual with dyslexia, you wouldn't really know they have it. It really is that word recognition side of this equation that's impaired. And because they can't pull those words off the page, then that reading comprehension suffers. It kind of bottlenecks and they can't comprehend the text, because to comprehend the text, you have to know how to actually read the words and what those words mean. And so when I say word recognition, I'm going to unpack that a little bit. Look, under the hood, it's not just as adult proficient readers, we can read a lot of words quickly and accurately, right? But really, it's more than just recognizing it. Underneath word recognition, we have to build this skill of phonological awareness or of manipulating sounds. Kids with dyslexia often struggle with manipulating small units of speech or sounds. So, for example, if I were to say, listen to these sounds, at, now say them fast together, cat, that blending, that's phonemic awareness. That's a blending skill. It's really important to be able to read words. And that's one of the skills required for good word recognition or good word reading, is being able to blend sounds together and also take sounds apart. Also, what's really important is what we call phonics knowledge. That's that relationship then between sounds and letters, that we have these letters and they represent sounds. That IGH says I, like in the word light, or AI says A, like in the word rain. And so knowing that those letters represent sounds, blending those sounds together is important for word recognition. But also something we don't think a lot about is meaning is really important for word reading, actually. Knowing what the word means helps you activate this, what we call a semantic representation when we're reading, what we can actually picture that word in our head. And all these three sources of knowledge come together to help support word recognition. And so, for example, let's say you're reading or your child's reading this word, trying to read this word I put on the screen on the page. They have the letters there, right? They have to use their phonics knowledge to actually retrieve the sounds for each letter or letter teams. L, I, t, right? So that's that phonics piece. But then they have to actually blend those sounds together to then read that word, light, light, blend those sounds together. That's that phonological awareness. And then they also retrieve a semantic representation or the vocabulary form of the word light, like a light bulb. And so all three of these together are really, really important to support kids with dyslexia. We have to attend to these, but for certain profiles and certain kids or types of profiles, I'm going to talk about these patterns, it might be a little different. But really at the core, dyslexia is a word level reading deficit, or some call it a word level reading disability. And so I'm going to unpack dyslexia just a little bit more, again, as a means to try to demystify it. First, because I'm a word nerd, we're going to get into some word origin. So this word itself comes from a lot of Greek roots. So we have dys, which means difficulty or impaired or hard. Lexis or lex means word or language. IA is a condition or state. And so literally dyslexia is difficulty with words. That's exactly what it is. It's a challenge with recognizing, reading, and also spelling words. I'm a big spelling guy because spelling is so, so important to help actually word reading skills. And so dyslexia is just a difficulty with words. I'm going to unpack a definition of dyslexia from the International Dyslexia Association. That's actually they're refining a little bit right now, but this is the common definition of dyslexia. You see what I have bold here? I'm going to unpack some of this quickly, but line by line to really understand what dyslexia is. Yes, it's difficulty with words, but really what does that mean? What does that mean for kids that we're trying to support? And first thing I really want to point out is that dyslexia is a specific learning disability, meaning in the United States, dyslexia is a recognized condition under our special education law. So in the United States, because I know we have some people joining us from Australia, Costa Rica, other countries, dyslexia is a specific learning disability. In our federal law, which every state has enacted as certain state level or special education laws, a specific learning disability is one of 13 categories of disability in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. And so dyslexia is actually named in IDEA's regulations as an example of a specific learning disability, which means that schools are required to provide services if they have dyslexia and it impacts their learning, it impacts the child's learning. So they're entitled to then special education services. And that service plan is often called an IEP, or is called an IEP, an individualized education program. And it really should be individualized to address reading, writing, and spelling needs, and also provide students with some accommodations, oftentimes extended time, speech to text, text to speech, those. But I'm really big on that. IEP should be providing actual intervention services. And so I bring this up explicitly because sometimes parents hear, oh, we don't recognize dyslexia here at our school. And that is not accurate. So if federal law makes it very clear that dyslexia is included, I have the statute right there in our special education federal law. And these children are entitled to support if, again, they have dyslexia and it's impacting their ability to learn at school. And so really that first part is that it's a specific learning disability in the area of usually we call basic reading skills or word reading. Also, it's neurobiological in origin, meaning that dyslexia reflects brain-based individual differences in how the reading network develops and activates in our brain. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist, but we know something about this. So reading relies in our brain on a network of brain regions that links those sounds, letters, and meaning together. So when I talked about under the hood of word recognition, all of those are actually connected as within a word form area of our brain. The left hemisphere is where we process language. And in individuals with dyslexia, they've done lots of fMRIs, so functional MRIs, and that network is typically underactivated, especially in that word form area that connects like letters to sounds and meaning, right? That is underactivated in those individuals. But I like to always say this before we get into it, brains are plastic, especially birth through age 8. They're really, really plastic. And so with really effective evidence-based instruction, brain activity patterns, we can actually change them with really, really good reading instruction and actually improve outcomes as well. And so that is good news. It's also interesting to see, I put this up here again, I'm not a neuroscientist, but we have some evidence of some brain imaging studies really showing this underactivation in key reading regions. And so while this isn't helpful for us as interventionists or to provide support, I like to show this to schools, to families, to parents and say this dyslexia really is a real thing, right? There's this underactivation in certain areas of the brain. And so really that this is not a kid is lazy or unmotivated, or they're not putting an effort, right? Their brain is underactivated in the ways that typical readers' brains are typically or normally activated. Dyslexia also, again, is characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition. And so I talked about how word recognition is that ability to read words quickly and accurately. Reading words accurately, meaning that the kid has a trouble with accuracy. They have trouble recognizing words correctly, maybe misreading ship as sip. Their fluency, meaning their reading might be really slow, reading words or connect to text, it might be slow, effortful, or even choppy, even when words are read correctly. And so I'll talk about different profiles of dyslexia. Some kids are really great reading words accurately. They can actually read words accurately in a list or out of context, but they go read them in a passage or connected text, and everything breaks down. That overall connected text fluency is impaired. And that might be a characteristic too. But both accuracy and fluency challenges really do make reading feel like a struggle. And again, inhibits reading comprehension. So reading comprehension suffers because the child's brain is just working so hard to get those words again off the page. And so they can't comprehend or make meaning from the text because their working memory is just overloaded with trying to sound out and trying to read the words. And so again, that fluent word recognition, so being able to instantly read words, we call it in our mental lexicon our sight vocabulary, that we can just see a word and automatically know what it means, know what it says, and connect it to its spelling. It's essential for reading comprehension. And so again, difficulties with accurate or fluent word reading, again, are hallmark signs and characteristics of dyslexia across languages, really, and also across ages as well. So across languages and ages. So moving on a little bit. So kids with dyslexia often, or even adults often, struggle with that accurate or fluent word recognition, and which again impedes their poor spelling. They might have poor spelling or decoding abilities. And so when I say decoding, decoding is the process. It's different from word reading, actually. It's the actual process of sounding out unfamiliar words by connecting letters to sounds. And so it's that skill of breaking apart a word like fantastic and sounding it out. Fantastic. So kids with dyslexia might not reliably connect letters with their sounds. So this process is harder and takes much longer. And also, spelling is often the window. If you have a child with dyslexia or you have dyslexia, spelling is it's always going to be impacted, because even if a child can read a word, writing it down or spelling it is more cognitively demanding. They have to retrieve the sounds, apply spelling conventions, sequence those letters correctly. And so spelling requires just a lot of precision of sounds and letter patterns. And often these difficulties can stem from weak phonological processing. So again, that part of the brain that when we think about pulling apart and manipulating sounds. When we read words, we have to blend sounds together, at, cat. And when we spell sounds, it's the opposite. We segment or take those sounds apart. Cat, at. And so moving on, again, these difficulties typically, and this is what they're changing in the actual Dyslexia Association definition now, because we have a lot more research and evidence that's come out since 2002, but they can result in a deficit in that phonological component of language. And again, phonological component or phonological processing, phone, we can use our language skills here, phone, Greek for like phone, like telephone. It's really how we hear, identify, and work with speech sounds. And so dyslexia often can involve a phonological processing deficit. There's a little asterisk there I'll talk about, but often. And these kids have difficulty noticing, remembering, again, working with sounds in spoken language. They typically have good expressive language skills, but then again, like manipulating those individual speech sounds, maybe rhyming can be tricky, maybe segmenting big parts of words, breaking apart those syllables. If I were to say, tap out the syllables or the parts in transportation, and they go, it's transportation, they might struggle with that. But it's important to note that not all children with dyslexia show this same profile. And so oftentimes our interventions historically really target this phonological processing, this phonological component. But we have so much evidence now, and this is part of this sort of talk I'm going into next, is that some struggle more with other parts of their reading brain, meaning something we call rapid naming, which I'll talk about, broader language skills, and also even attention and executive function. And so it's not only they might have a deficit in this phonological component, they often do, but we're seeing a lot of evidence that not all kids with dyslexia have this. There's a lot of heterogeneity. It doesn't present itself the same way in all kids. And so while most children with dyslexia struggle with that phonological processing, manipulating sounds, research is showing that dyslexia since 1999 can present in different ways depending on the underlying cognitive profile. And I'm going to talk about 3 different common profiles of dyslexia. These aren't like lockstep, like your child's going to be an in one of these specifically, but these are the patterns that we've been seeing in research and the scientific evidence that some kids might have what we call a phonologically based dyslexia. Some might have what I'll talk about as a naming speed or fluency based dyslexia. And some kids, and oftentimes now, really, we see a pattern of them having both, what we call a double deficit, where they're phonologically based deficit and also a naming speed or fluency base. And so it's important that we understand these so then we can match the intervention or supports to the type of dyslexia they have, that those underlying cognitive mechanisms that might be underactivated or impaired a little bit. And so I'll first start with the most common or historically what we think a lot about. And so any of our common dyslexia interventions or reading intervention programs, we often think a lot about targeting this phonological profile of dyslexia. And so what you might see at home if you're a parent or you're a teacher or at school is trouble sounding out newer nonsense words. So they might have lots of phonics-based errors when they're reading. They're having a hard time connecting that speech to print, spelling errors. And really here, accuracy is that pain point, right? So accurately reading words, take a lot more reps, I'll call it like practice opportunities to really map that word when they practice sounding it out. And so if you have a neuropsychological evaluation, if your child's school maybe did a psychoeducation evaluation, when you look at those evaluation results, typically we'll see low phonological processing scores. So a very common assessment you might see is the CTOP, the comprehensive test of phonological processing. Their segment, their elision, their blending might be really low. But what we call rapid automized naming, which taps really that we call that fluency profile of dyslexia, might be average. And really, when I say RAN or rapid automized naming, the test is literally a kid having a piece of paper. There are sometimes shapes or colors or letters or numbers, and it's timed, and they have to look at a shape or look at a color and say what that color is. It might be red, yellow, blue. And really, it's not actually tapping their then sort of phonological processing. It's tapping their ability to map visual input and then retrieve. It's a retrieval sort of problem with RAN. For kids with phonological only dyslexia, they typically don't have a problem retrieving things. It's that phonological processing they have that deficit. And so this happens, they have difficulties manipulating speech sounds and making that mapping sounds and letters inefficient. And that really impairs their ability to read or decode words. And so when we think about matching instruction or intervention or support to this profile, we want what we call explicit, so direct, systematic phonics and decoding instruction with some spelling. So you're gonna hear a lot about teaching phonics with lots of cumulative reviews. So you're constantly coming back and spiraling. And I'll talk about, I'm not into one specific intervention program. I'll talk about options and some of my ones that I often recommend, but lots of review and lots of practice applying their phonics skills to connected text. So to sentences and to also passages with support. And that really is a good match to this profile. They're doing some phonemic awareness work. We're actually teaching them explicitly how to blend sounds together. And we're providing them lots and lots of corrective feedback right when they make errors to make sure those errors aren't ingrained. But the second profile is sometimes, usually often called the naming speed or fluency subtype. And so these are the kids who can usually sound words out pretty accurately. And I have a case study example of one child I worked with this summer. I typically don't work with kids one-on-one anymore, but over the summer I got to work with one. And these are the two that they can sound out these words accurately. It might feel slow and really laborious for them. But when they go to apply their knowledge to then that connected text, those passages, sentences, everything really breaks down. And so what you see here is kids that read accurately, but really slowly and effortlessly, a lot of effort there. When you look at an evaluation report and you're like, does my child have this deficit? You're going to see a subtest called rapid automized naming, which if your state in Georgia, we're doing dyslexia screening, this is a subtest in that screening and a subtest a lot of school psychologists will use, a lot of neuropsychologists most use this when we think dyslexia. We might hypothesize that might be what's going on. Those are going to be pretty low. It's going to be low or low average with age appropriate phonological awareness and decoding skills. So you're going to see often their fluency, their oral reading fluency, their RAN is lagging a lot more than accuracy. They might have pretty good phonological processing skills. And so why this sort of is tricky for them when they read is because that reduced efficiency or retrieving things on the page make it have a hard time accessing and integrating visual and verbal information. Dyslexia isn't sort of a visual problem. It's not like eye training or an ophthalmologist can really help us with this, but it's the integration of all this and what we call it's that naming. So being able to really name anything quickly, not even if it's a word or a letter or a shape or an object, it's that naming speed is impaired. And so for this type of profile, we want to still do some of that integrated word study, which I just talked about, but it's going to be a lot more purposeful fluency practice. So things called repeated or continuous reading. We're going to do something called phrase cue text. Again, I'll talk more about this here at the end. And morphology, which is really teaching them meaningful word parts. So like in the word, let's say preheat, that pre means before you heat, before. So preheat would mean you heat something before. And adding in morphology with this sort of subtype, even early on, second, third grade, is going to help them efficiently read words because we want to integrate all those forms of word identification, sound, spelling, and meaning. The meaning becomes really important here. They can activate these words really quickly when they read. And so the last profile here is the double deficit. So that's both of these together. And this is often one of the most tricky types of dyslexia to remediate. And so here you're going to see inaccurate and slow word reading, decoding, and spelling, and that fluency all impacted. And so when I look at a neuropsych report for a child like this, or I look at a psychoed report, in those assessments, you're going to see weaknesses in phonemic awareness. So phonological processing will be low or low average. That rapid automized naming subtest is going to be also low average. And this additive risk just predicts broader reading difficulties. This is really tricky. We can do a lot with this still. It's just trickier to remediate. And so when we think of matching then intervention or treatment to this type of dyslexia, it needs to be more intensive. It needs to be carefully coordinated and have a multi-component intervention. And so we'll do all those phonics and decoding things as well. We're going to add in spelling and fluency. We're going to be doing a lot of frequent progress monitoring. I'll show examples of this, but we're going to make sure that actually the instruction we're providing is working. If it's not, we want to change. We want to make sure that we adjust. We want to be really responsive. And so overall, again, not all dyslexia looks the same. We really want to match profiles to intervention at the school setting, at the home setting, if you can, if you're working with a tutor. And so generally these buckets here I kind of think of this. And so there's different programs that sort of attack each of these. But if it's a phonological only or more PA profile, more of that heavy decoding and spelling dose, and again, connected text practice. The RAN only or rapid automized naming is really focusing on fluency building with familiar text, meaning they can read them, they've read them before, and also what we call stretch text. It's a little challenging for them to read. We want to push kids a little bit above what we call decodable text, especially after second grade with teacher, parent, or peer support. That can actually really help them attack sort of the text that they're expected to read and sort of stretch their brains out a little bit when they practice. And so also here we want to be really flexible with teaching morphology, so meaningful word parts, and making sure that accuracy is still tuned up. We don't need a ton of actual intensive phonics instruction with the RAN only deficit. A little goes a long way. Also, you can do a lot at once with this profile, but it's that fluency piece we really, really want to work on, giving them lots of chance to practice. And then that double deficit is really just a blend of both and also providing them some access support. So what we call accommodations. So text to speech while those skills build. When I work with families and schools and districts, very careful about not over accommodating, right? I want to make sure that when a kid's getting services in schools, that we're providing specially designed instruction if they have an IEP. So actually addressing, right, are the root cause. Accommodations sort of help give access when they're in the general education setting or in their classroom. But we really want to make sure that we're not, as sort of individuals, we're not kind of putting a Band-Aid over something. We really want to actually attack that root cause and really get in there and remediate what's going on. So back to the definition, we're almost done with this part, but that was sort of, I want to caveat there because this definition is changing, because we know a lot more about different types of dyslexia. It's not just that phonological component. The rest of the part of this definition really is that dyslexia is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. And so what does that mean? So it's often unexpected. And so one of the reasons that dyslexia can be so frustrating for families and for kids is sometimes it feels really out of sync. Your child might be very articulate, curious, potentially even gifted in areas, maybe math, art, or reasoning, yet they struggle to read simple words. And so that's why in that definition, we think that we have that unexpected phrase in there. It's because that difficulty with reading stands in stark contrast sometimes, not all the time, to other abilities. And so parents often say this, my child is so bright, or it's not adding up, what's going on? And that's exactly right. It's not, dyslexia is really not tied to intelligence. It's unexpected. When again, we look at profiles of dyslexia, typically IQ, right? Intelligence is typically average, or it could be even above average. And so it's not really about effort even or motivation, but about how that brain, that underactivation on that left hemisphere processes written language, and mapping that sound to print is really, really tricky. And so this is also why sometimes kids can go undiagnosed for too long. And I'm so happy here in the United States, and I think 49 states, we have this dyslexia related legislation where we're screening dyslexia in grades K through 3 because their strengths can mask those reading struggles. Or sometimes we think, oh, they're not trying hard enough, or oh, what happened? We really want to make sure that we catch them before they fall. That early intervention again is really, really key. The other part of that definition is that it's despite effective classroom instruction. And so I also think this part of the definition is really important for parents to hear, because kids with dyslexia struggle with reading more than their peers, even if they're being provided really high quality instruction in their general education classroom or in that setting, in that what we sometimes call core or tier 1. It's really high quality. And again, it's because dyslexia reflects an underactivation in those key reading regions of the brain, which makes word recognition and spelling harder without targeted support. We have some dyslexia prevalence estimates. It's between, some people say 20%, 10%, but it's really in between that 10 to 20%, right, of kids struggle with dyslexia. And so even if they have a really amazing kindergarten, first, second grade teacher, they just might need extra help. They might need specially designed instruction through special ed services. They might need more. And so I say this too because good classroom instruction, a good pre-K, kindergarten, first grade teacher can really reduce the severity of dyslexia. And it acts as what we call a protective factor, meaning their dyslexia might not be as severe. Let's say if they were in a classroom that didn't have really great reading instruction, maybe they weren't doing phonics instruction in their class. But again, lots of our early literacy laws here in the United States are shifting towards to being more science aligned or evidence aligned reading instruction. And so that good instruction can really help reduce the severity. And for some kids, we might even prevent a lot of the difficulties that we see. And so a good teacher is a really, really good thing, a really protective factor, but a kid still might need more. And that's really why then we need to give them these supports. The rest of this definition really talks about all the secondary consequences, right? And we kind of alluded to some of these things that can happen, right? Reading comprehension being reduced reading experience, and then impedes growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. And so I really like this diagram from a text by Fletcher et al. It's a learning disabilities sort of, I will call it Bible, but it really, they have this diagram here that really shows here. So we have that deficit in the phonological component, maybe, or sounding out words, is sort of that core deficit, right? But they struggle with noticing, pulling apart, and working with sounds. But this core weakness leads to all these downstream challenges. So challenges in decoding or sounding out words, challenges in spelling, reading words accurately, right? Their fluency as well. That then impedes, right, first of all, their overall reading comprehension. So they're having a hard time reading a text that's in front of them, which also impedes they have a reduced reading experience, because often struggling readers avoid reading. If you're not enjoying, or if you're not good at something, right, we don't really want to try at it. And so kids they're going to be reading less, which means we're going to have less robust vocabulary knowledge, less background knowledge, because a lot of what we do when we read after third grade is we're learning lots of information. Thinking about kids that are in science and social studies and all their content area classes, they're going to be having sort of that deficit of background knowledge or knowing about things of the world if they're not having access to text, which then again also reduces reading comprehension, because background knowledge and vocabulary is really so important. And so in reading. And this is sort of a biblical adage, but we call this Matthew effects. And so this graph kind of shows what happens over time with reading. Children who start off really strong in reading tend to keep getting stronger at a rapid speed. So they read more, they build more vocabulary and knowledge, and that gap which keeps widening between kids that really do struggle with reading. And so the kids who start off behind, often those with dyslexia or who struggle, don't get that same amount of practice. And so again, they read less, they avoid reading, their vocabulary and background knowledge grows a little more slowly. And so again, this creates this widening gap. But we can get them the right support. And that's sort of the last part of my talk here is really that the good news is that dyslexia is responsive to intervention, or I call intervention, right? Is something more than what they're getting in their classroom instruction, right? It's intervention, it's tutoring, it's extra support. So with the right kind of support, kids, adolescents, adults with dyslexia can become skilled and confident readers. And so we know, because of brain plasticity, that early intervention is best, right? That before third grade, if we can get in there and intervene and really provide targeted support, it's going to reduce a lot of the severity right down the road here. And so the earlier we provide targeted support, the better the long-term outcomes are. That's really with anything in medicine as well, right? Early, right, we want to have prevention, right? An ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. And so we want to do as much as we can to prevent severe reading difficulties. Also, it's really important that schools and parents, mostly on schools or tutoring support, monitor progress regularly to see what's working also. Like we want to make sure it's working. And so we must, though, be responsive to data. I'll talk a little about data and adjust and structure our intervention if that growth isn't happening. We want to make sure we keep a really good eye on it. And so this is also, again, I'm not a neuroscientist, but these are also nice to show that really show some promise for what we're doing is that this dyslexia is responsive to intervention. So this is from a 2002 study that sort of had these kids with dyslexia, and they provided them, they scanned their brains before intervention and after intervention, and they noticed that after intervention down there was a dramatic increase in the activation of that left sort of hemisphere of their brain. That temporal parietal region was noted in every child, rendering activation profiles similarly to those observed that are typically developing kids without reading problems. And so before and after intervention, you can see through brain imaging that dyslexia is really responsive to intervention, right? They have increased activity in the left hemisphere. And so what we do in schools and at home really can rewire some of that reading network in the brain if we're doing it carefully. I want to provide this case study to sort of close some of this out, is that I had a child that just got diagnosed with dyslexia. She was a rising second grader, and she had that fluency profile. So that rapid automized naming profile, right? Her phonological awareness was average, and some of it was even above average when I read her neuropsychological evaluation report. But she was not sort of making any progress in school. And so I'm friends with her mother. This summer, I was like, all right, let's go ahead. I'm going to provide you some intervention. I'm going to do 16 sessions. I'm going to take data and we're going to see what happens. And so I took data starting on her baseline, which was 25 correct words per minute, which is just she reads a passage for a minute and I tally up sort of how many words she read correctly. According to all these national norms that we have, she was below the 20th percentile at the typically developing kids. So she was below the 20th percentile in reading. Over the summer, we did 16 intervention sessions, and I really focused a little bit on phonics, but a lot of it was fluency focused. So we worked on tackling complex text a lot. So I did 16 sessions, 45 minutes, that was it. We did a lot of what I call, again, the research calls stretch text. So it was challenging for her, but we were working through it. And so after those 16 sessions, she grew from that 25th percent or that 20th percentile all the way to the 40th percentile in just 2 months, which put her out of the at-risk range. We call that minimal risk. And so just to show that I matched her dyslexia profile, which was really that fluency profile. Her phonemic awareness, her phonological processing was intact. We did some phonics, but we did a lot of fluency work. We really tackled complex text. And I also integrate a lot of that word meaning, that morphology in there. And so she got to enter school really making some really great gains in a very short amount of time. And so I like to show this because it shows by matching intervention to a child's profile and also monitoring progress along the way can change outcomes quickly. When I work with schools and families, this is what I say. I want you to monitor the child's progress. This is best practice on what we should be doing, right? Visually graphing that data, right? Using psychometrically sound measures, which one is called oral reading fluency or ORF, that it takes 1 minute to assess, doing it every session to make sure that we're actually growing, right? If there's a stall, this little drop right here was a 2 week break after 4th of July. If there's a stall, though, if my intervention wasn't working after a couple of weeks, I'm going to shift 4 to 6 weeks. I'm going to change my instruction. I'm going to change what I'm doing because we want to be responsive, right, to the child. And so again, if you work with schools, if your child's on an IEP, ask to see, this is what we call progress monitoring data. They work with the tutor. Can I see the progress monitoring data? Always done best graph this visually. This is what I train all my graduate students to do, all my dyslexia interventionists, undergrads as well. When I used to train undergrads at UT Austin, doing the same exact thing. We want to visually track progress to make sure that we're hitting the goal, that what we call the goal line. And if it's not, something needs to change. Because for kids with dyslexia, we cannot wait, right? I always talk about we need to be really efficient here. We have no time to waste. And if it's not working, we need to change what we're doing. More of the same is not good, right? We need something to shift. And that might be shifting programs. It might be adding a little more fluency work or a little more phonics, or sometimes a little more spelling and writing might really help. And so we can use correct words minute as a proxy for overall reading achievement. It's really sensitive to growth. And so that's why we want to use that. Just a couple more slides here to wrap up here. And a lot of times parents ask, which program should I look for? And the truth is there's not a single magic program. So what really matters most is the program follows is really evidence aligned. And so really shows, I have some buckets here that I'm going to talk about, but really shows sort of promise in research and also has some of this content that's matched with their profile. And I'll go over this quickly. I'm going to show a checklist I have that you can download that I have a link to on my website. But when I think about programs, these are the 4 buckets: the design of the program, what the content is focused on, the dosage, so how often the kid's receiving that program or that intervention, and then is there's research to support it. As a researcher, I want to see the data. I want to see that this program works for kids that have reading difficulties such as dyslexia. And so I'm not going to go through all of these, but instructionally, it should be explicit. The program or the tutor that you're working with or the special educator, whoever, the reading interventionist, are clearly teaching sort of the sub-skills of reading. It follows a cumulative sequence, and that instruction adapts based on ongoing assessment. That diagnostic part's really important for kids. The content focus is going to shift depending on what stage of development a child is in. Early readers, when I say that, I mean kindergarten through 2nd grade, including subphonemic awareness, if they have that sort of profile, phonics, spelling, and some reading fluency practice. Adolescent readers, and really when I mean adolescent readers, I mean after 3rd grade in the States, we want to shift our instruction a lot to be less phonics heavy and really support morphology, flexible syllabication, so word attack strategies, not syllable types, but syllabication, or lots of, we don't want lots of rules for kids with dyslexia. It bogs down their working memory, and also support oral reading fluency. And for, this should say adult readers, my last one, really focusing on functional reading skills and also some motivational supports. Research shows that we want the dosage matters, meaning like we take medication, the same thing we have in education science or reading science. So we want the intervention to be delivered at least 3 to 4 times a week. 4 to 5 is really best case. You think about early intervention, those early readers, about 30 to 60 minutes a session. Should be aligned with the kid's current skill level and show measurable progress over time. Again, data. I want to see progress monitoring data. I will not know if the intervention is working unless I see data. I even anecdotally, oh, they're reading better. I want to see the numbers. I want to make sure they're making progress and they're meeting their grade level expectations so they don't lag further behind. So that data, I say it a lot, it's really important. And also I want the program to have a research foundation. So it needs to be based on methods with published research, peer-reviewed research, showing positive effects for kids with dyslexia. There are some programs that will publish peer-reviewed research, but they're negative or there's some really small effects. I want positive, meaningful effects for kids. There's some websites that you can scout out: What Works Clearinghouse, the National Center for Intensive Intervention, and also looking at peer-reviewed studies. So these are really all important. I'll show my checklist here in a second you can download. But again, I don't have a favorite program. I'm program agnostic. I've been trained in Orton Gillingham at the associate level. I've been trained in a plethora of other programs. I went through an IDA accredited structured literacy program as well. There's not one size fits all. There's so many factors to think about: the time, the cost, If you're working with the school, their ability to access the program. If you're working with a tutor, the cost of the tutor might be, cost prohibitive. There are a lot of ways here. There's a lot of programs that might work well. These are some that I often find myself recommending a lot. The first being one called Sound Partners for kids with grades K through 2. It's backed by multiple randomized controlled trials. It's a phonics-based tutoring program that they found that even teachers' assistants or paraprofessionals can implement in schools and make really meaningful growth. This is what I had my paraprofessional do when I was an early or a resource special education teacher on top of what I was already doing. So it's a program. Parents can even implement this. I recommend this to parents a lot. There's a study going on at UT Austin now. They're training fourth graders to implement sound partners with kindergartners at the after school YMCA. So if fourth graders can do it, I feel really, really good about other parents or tutors doing it too. Word connections is one that I'm biased towards, having worked on this in my doctoral training program. And if you Google word connections videos, you'll see me demoing lessons. It's a free open source program. And I'll have all the links in the thing I'm going to share next. But it's a multi-syllabic word reading or intervention for kids in grades 3 and above. It's been field tested. I provided hundreds of hours of this in sort of some research studies, also multiple randomized control trials showing really positive effects. Rewards is another one, very similar to word connections, but it costs some money. And the last one, we think about adults with dyslexia. Often I find myself recommending corrective reading. Multiple randomized control trials and large scale studies support this as well, but it's a very intensive accelerated reading intervention program. Not a lot of training to implement it, but really can have positive effects on kids in grades 3 through 12. And also there's been some promise as far as adult literacy as well. And so finding somebody to help provide that program for adults, especially, it's a great, very explicit direct instruction program. If you would like to download this I have this little checklist about everything I chatted about. It's on my website as well. If you just go to brennanchandler.com/parents, there's some other resources up there as well. I have this webinar I put on here. If I do other ones, I have that there as well. I will have the website here on this page too. I'm doing just a plug for again, I love that we're having all these organizations in Georgia put on these events. Another free webinar that I'm going to talk about actual high impact early literacy routines parents can do at home for the International Dyslexia Association of Georgia on October 9th at 7. And so if you go to my website, brennanchandler.com/parents, you can sign up for the IDA Georgia one. That's really going to be focused on if you're a parent, if you're a kid with dyslexia or just reading difficulty and you want some things that you can do at home to support that, please sign up. I have other stuff there as well, other resources on my website for parents. If you do sign up for an email list, no spam. I usually often send out things that are upcoming webinars and parent events as well. So we have some time now for a Q&A. Thank you so much for staying with me. I know I sped through some of that pretty fast, but I always find myself packing a lot into these.
That was awesome, Dr. Chandler. Thank you. So much valuable information. I want to address some questions in the chat first, and then maybe you can get into an open Q&A, or would you prefer people write questions in the chat so we can kind of keep track of them?
Yeah, whatever works. Yeah, happy to do.
Let's start with the chat just so these don't get lost. The first question that was asked is if somebody goes to their local psychologist to get an assessment, will they tell you typically which types of dyslexia the child has so that they can match for instruction, or is it usually kind of a more general dyslexia diagnosis?
Yeah, so it really depends on the neuropsychologist. I've read hundreds of neuropsych evaluations now, and I think some will actually specify. So clinical psychologists have sort of these codes that they'll use. So it'll be typically specific learning disorder, not sort of learning disability in the area of, it might say basic reading or reading fluency, right? That can be sort of a key. Sometimes as well, sometimes you do have to do a little bit of digging and sort of looking at what I talked here a bit about. So clinical psychologists do a lot, but sometimes not super maybe up to date on everything as far as to sort of subtypes. And so looking at the evaluation might give you some hints as well. Their recommendations will be helpful, but really taking a look at those specific subtests, meaning when they talk about just control F when you get the report, RAN, looking at that, looking at their phonological processing, and then that as well.
Yeah. And maybe if you are looking at scheduling an evaluation, that might be a question, and shopping around kind of for psychologists who are doing the testing, that might be something that you want to ask them if that's what they provide, being able to pinpoint those different types of dyslexia. And
You
this,
want to add one more thing to that, if I can, Lauren. Just I always, again, schools will do if you request, right, and you notice characteristics of dyslexia. If you request an evaluation, it really school psychologists can do. It's not going to be as intensive as a neuropsych evaluation, but a psychoed is a first step. A lot of the same subtests are going to be done. It won't be as in depth. I don't like when parents have to, especially if you're in the States and you request, right? There's certain, depending on the state, a certain amount of days schools have to get back to you. But I really urge to start at the school first, just so you don't have to pay out of pocket for something that can be quite expensive. And then maybe if you're not satisfied, or if you want to get a little more, really more in the weeds and look at a little more testing, then going the neuropsych route.
definitely, definitely. The same person also asked if they said, I'm also wondering if stealth dyslexia is a type of dyslexia. Are you
I
familiar?
haven't heard about that one. So that that makes me think about, right, when it kind of goes like we don't really notice it's appearing because of kind of what I talked about. Like they can sometimes really mask that well, especially in K1 too.
Mhm.
And sometimes in third grade when the demands rise, then sometimes we see that emerging. And so not necessarily a type, just it sounds like it kind of just flies under the radar, and we
Mhm.
might not be catching that early enough.
Right. And may have come up with different coping strategies and mechanisms to help support like other areas, right? So it might not be as noticed. I see. Okay, the next question, I love this question. Can you just touch on why non-structured literacy programs like balanced literacy are harmful to dyslexic students?
Yeah, there's a lot of great, especially now podcasts about this. If you want to dig in more, a lot of Emily Hanford podcasts. She's done a lot with this work, but really when we think about something called balanced literacy or like more of a whole language or reading exposure approach, that's not really aligned to how our brain learns to read efficiently. And so, especially in K1, 2, kindergarten, first, second, that primary, we really want to make sure that all kids, and even the kids at risk for dyslexia, are receiving right explicit systematic phonics instruction. They're being taught that their sounds connect to letters and what those letters and sounds represent together. And so when we bypass that and we don't teach that explicitly, it leads to a lot of guessing. For kids with dyslexia, that's extremely harmful. For typically developing kids, they're going to kind of sometimes figure it out or overcompensate one way or the other. But for kids with dyslexia, it really is tricky because of the guessing is not good, right? They're not being explicitly taught that. And then again, you see that those Matthew effects, right? That good instruction person or the poor reader, the good reader, those gaps are going to be even wider then, right? Because we want to make sure we're starting with really high quality, explicit, systematic, structured instruction in those early grades because it's really the most efficient for everybody. It's harmful to anybody, but it's really really important for these kids so that they have a good core start to reading proficiency.
Hmm. Yeah. The next question was this, you touched on this a bit, how you suggested maybe starting at the school level for evaluations, but is Lindemood Bell specifically a reputable place to get evaluated? And if so, is it also a good place for remediation, in your opinion?
Yeah, and so again, I'm going to talk about the actual evaluation. I'm not familiar with their evaluation process. Family, if you email me, if you're in a certain area, I can recommend some specific places that I think do a really phenomenal job. I about not knowing enough about the evaluation because I never read a neuropsych or an eval from them. But their actual instruction, again, it depends. So Lindemood Bell, when you think about that phonological core deficit, that's really more matched to that. And they do have some research supporting that. That's peer reviewed. So Linden Mubel or LIPS can help with that phonological only deficit. That's really what their program is meant for. It can be, again, I get into I'm very like efficient, cost effective. Like if you can pay for it, right? It can be really expensive, and that's sometimes what I fear with programs is that we want to make sure it might be more expensive, and it might not. But another program might be even like the same amount of being effective, and even maybe more efficacious for less cost. You might remediate faster, but that's just something that every family I sort of has to take into account.
Hmm. So the next question was, are there any apps or web-based programs that are recommended? And it sounds like they're asking for kind of a more of a one size fits all approach as opposed to something that's more prescriptive?
Yeah, a lot of parents ask me this, and I will say, from what I've read and what we have available, the app, I haven't seen a lot of positive effects for any sort of app-based or tech-based sort of application, but especially in that early literacy. When we get into more adolescence, there's some more promising. I know there's Read 180 is on the What Works Clearinghouse. I think that's a little web app based, but for what I've seen, I don't have a great answer for that because really is efficient. Which I know parents, we whatever we can do, right, to support that. But as far as an intervention, not so much.
Hmm. Um, Dr. Chandler, you mentioned that you speak with schools as well. How does that typically work?
So when I speak, so speaking with schools, so usually typically, if I work with schools, I'm either working with them sort of a research study or a research practice partnership, or I'm doing some consultation services for schools, working on their sort of special education programming, working on their literacy sort of initiatives and providing professional development to their teachers is what I mean by sort of working with schools. I don't do any sort of school-based advocacy anymore as far as helping families get services, but I'm always happy to connect with special education advocates that could help. We have some great ones in Georgia, I know, that can sort of help get parents some supports as far as navigating the special education process at school.
Hmm. And I just responded to um, Heather's question, which is asking for guidance on finding an advocate. And I said that I also have, a few advocates that I really, really highly recommend. But if people have specific questions for you, would you like them, is it okay for them to reach out via
Yeah,
email?
always. You're always welcome to email me with any questions. Yeah, I try to respond to every email I get. Sometimes I will, if you put on that email list on my website, I do some drop-in office hours sometimes just to connect with the family, especially everybody, but especially Georgia families. You can come in, just kind of ask questions. I open up a few of those every month on certain days of the week if you want to sign up for a time, but I'm really always happy to connect with families and then or to sort of sometimes refer and can coordinate to different, like tutors, interventionists, special education advocates, or other supports that they might need.
That is awesome. That's very, very cool. I appreciate that so much as well. Okay, we have three more quick questions, and then I know we are going to have to wrap our time up here. But just kind of following back or going back to the structured literacy, or excuse me, lack of structured literacy. Somebody asked, why is guessing bad when you're in instruction or teaching?
Yeah, yeah, gets into I could answer this in a 20-minute conversation, but I'll do the quick one. So when kids with dyslexia, especially dyslexia, we need them to read words. So right, that word recognition, that quick and effortless reading, the transition from right decoding, so sounding out each sound, each letter or letters, and then reading that whole word. That transition is called orthographic learning. So we want to get kids from sounding out individual words to then actually recognizing those words by sight. The only way to do that, though, is to have them sound out unknown words. For typically developing kids, every time they send out a word a couple times, then it's mapped in their sight vocabulary. They can see it instantly. A lot of us probably, we decode an unfamiliar word. My friend's a genetic counselor. He sent me some publication he wrote today. I don't know what those words are, but sometimes I'll sound them out. And then after a few times, okay, I kind of map it and I read it. But for kids with dyslexia, we want them to sound out every single word they don't know. We don't want them sounding out forever, but that process of orthographic learning relies on them sounding it out. Every single rep is important. We ran a study last year in some dyslexia, or 2 years ago in some dyslexia schools. For some kids with dyslexia, it takes them 15 or more practice opportunities to map a word into their mental lexicon or their sight vocabulary. So every time that they guess, they're missing out on a progress opportunity.
Hmm.
And practice opportunities, those reps are so, so important. So we want them, when we're working with them, to sound out words that they don't know. We never, and that kid I work with this summer, she tried to pull it a little bit. She's trying to guess. No, we're not guessing. Go back, sound out the word. Use your finger, sound out each sound. And that's that habit we want to definitely break. So then again, they can have those practice opportunities and map their whole words to
Hmm.
their.
Yeah, great. Okay, we have one more question here. And as far as intervention 3 to 4 times per week, would this be in blocks or just ongoing? And I think the parents' concern is that if you're also doing additional intervention, for example, here to address apraxia and speech, that's taking up a lot of after school time too, it sounds like, and they're worried about the intensive nature of doing both of them at the same time. So would they both be ongoing?
So this is why I like to work with schools and partner with schools a lot and provide, that's why I train teachers and why I consult with schools as well, is because we want a lot of that happening in the school day. Like that this when I'm talking about some of this reading intervention, not maybe all of it can happen. Maybe their dyslexia is, a little more severe, or maybe you even want outside support, and that's okay. So my first thing is, and getting that into school day as much as possible is important for burnout, right? So I say 3 to 4 days a week. When I was a special ed teacher, right, if I was providing dyslexia intervention, often 4 to 5 times a week, they'd come to my room for 45 minutes, right, a session. And that was built in the school day. Then after school, they have maybe they do outside speech therapy or something. And so 3 to 4 times a week speech therapy also should be done at the school, right? Schools have SLPs, but if you want that extra support, then
Mhm.
I think being mindful, right, of balancing that trade-off between what really is our priority now. Like maybe it's say outside of school right now, it is that speech therapy, right? That apraxia is important, right, to remediate. And then maybe it's 2 times a week with dyslexia support outside of school.
Mhm.
But again, urging parents to work and collaborate with schools to make sure that these services, which our children are legally entitled to, a lot of this can be happening in the school day as well. And so coordinating intervention teams is also important. But I hope I answered that as well as I could. But as much as you can do without burning out a child, when we talk about adolescents or kids that are their adolescent learners that still struggle, that's right, a different conversation as well. As like we want to do as much as we can without burning them out with everything else that's going on. Because if you're experiencing reading failure, you're probably not wanting to do a lot of this stuff outside of school. It might be a big chore to sit down and do outside tutoring and
Definitely. I think you answered it. Okay, we have one more question here, and then we'll ask for any questions that come up afterwards to be directed to Dr. Chandler's email and or the mailing list, right?
Yeah, email for questions for sure. I'll put this here too, so my email is there. This
Great.
email works great for that as well. But yeah, otherwise, if you want to sign up for just webinars and things, we'll do LDA, IDA,
Mhm.
other ones. I think another school, this dyslexia school is going to have me do a webinar. I'll send all that information.
Great, great. Okay, so this last question says, do you have any studies conducted on the impact of gamification on dyslexia intervention approaches?
Gamification.
Oh, I'm sorry. Gamifications. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that gamification as in I'm not a tech. So I'm not I don't participate in any sort of tech-based sort of studies now, and I have in the past. Gamification as far as like within sort of reading intervention, just like low tech, definitely. So word connections is gamified, but there's no sort of tech-based sort of app-based sort of support with that as well. I'm sure there could be. That's sort of an area that I don't work a lot in. And so gamification, anytime we can gamify something for students with dyslexia is going to be helpful if we're still attending to all those key practices that I kind of outlined on my little checklist there, right? That content is there, that there's a responsive individual with them in the room, a tutor, a teacher, a parent. That really the key with a lot of this is providing that immediate error correction and giving them sort of opportunities to go back and retry. And so I think that is a part that's really we want to make sure those elements are still intact if we're adding on a sort of gamified element.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, gamification makes much more sense than glamification. So thank you. I think that that was a great question. Okay, we have some. Okay, yes. So this recording is going to be posted. It'll be emailed to everybody that registered, and I'll post it to LDA's YouTube channel. Just as a reminder, also, we do bi-monthly webinars with specialists like Dr. Chandler. Um, but we are so lucky to have learned from you this evening. Thank you for everybody for coming and spending your Monday night with us. This was really, really helpful and insightful. And yeah, we look forward to staying in touch with you, Dr. Chandler. And yeah, we appreciate it. So if you guys if anybody wants to stay on and ask any questions to me about LDA, we also do have, just a reminder, we have on Saturday our Fall Expo, which is at the Sproul Center for Arts. And there's going to be a lot of great resources there. It's in Dunwoody. But you can feel free to log off if you are all set. But thank you again.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for having me, Lauren.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye.
Night, everybody. I'll stay on for just a few minutes in case anybody has any questions or wants to chat.
Hey, Lauren,
Hi.
can I have 2 minutes of yours?
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm new to this world. I would like to know what is LDA and how does it work, and if I need to get in touch with you. So I'm in a research stage right now on dyslexia. So if
Great.
I would like to get in touch with you, what would be the best way and what's happening with LDA?
Sure. Well, we are the Learning Disability Association. We're the Georgia chapter. So dyslexia is not only like our only focus. We focus on all learning disabilities.
Uh-huh.
And we basically provide resources and support to families within the community. My company is focuses on Orton Gillingham, which Dr. Chandler, touched briefly on, but it's one of
Uh-huh.
the like remediations for dyslexia. So that's kind of where I fit in here. But yes, we're all. Basically, we're here to serve you guys, I mean, just in the community and however we can. So we get requests sometimes for people who are looking for advocates, for example, or for recommendations for local testing, even, recommendations or for tutors or for um, private schools. So we just try to be as helpful of a resource as we can be.
Okay.
And I add to that, we are a local nonprofit grassroots.
Okay.
In other words, we're all volunteer.
Okay.
So one way to be involved is to join LDA.
Okay.
And then that puts you, it gives you some of the national resources, puts you in touch with us, and we can use as much help as we can get as well. But it is a volunteer base trying to do what we can
Okay.
to support professionals, families, individuals who value supporting people with learning differences.
So do you help right from the diagnosis stage to getting them connected with the right folks for intervention? That would be right.
Can you repeat that one time? I'm sorry.
So LDA is you guys help families of those diagnosed with dyslexia right from the diagnosis stage to getting them connected with folks who can give them the right intervention.
We
We
can,
can,
and we have.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
I think that we just, we're here as a resource to support in every way possible. So,
Okay.
being in that field directly, I very often, kind of help to be that middleman, and help to find resources and the best fit. So
Okay.
if you do need support in that, in this stage, you can
Uh-huh.
definitely reach out and I'm happy to help.
Thank you, Lauren. I have sent you a connection request on LinkedIn.
Okay,
So
great.
whenever you get time.
Sure.
Thank you
yeah.
so much.
Also,
Yes,
there is
Dana.
an LDA of Georgia has an email address,
Hmm.
Okay.
ldaofgeorgia@gmail.com,
Yes.
where you can send questions. And I think on our Facebook page, you can find a phone number that you can text questions and someone will try to get back to you as well. So we have different ways to get in contact with the organization.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dana, for the information.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone. Well, I'll give it just one more minute and then I'll go ahead and close us out. Thank you, Heather. I got your email address. I'll reach out with that information for you. All right. Well, I'm going to close this out. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Dina, I will touch base with you, and I'm going to stop this recording. Okay, good night.